So we're here to talk about the human fly.
Yeah.
First, I want to know why the human fly is back, because the human fly that I remember was wrapped in so much mystery, so much unsolved, unanswered questions. And then when I see the human flies coming back on my radar all these years later, especially being a Montrealer, it definitely piqued my interest.
So why don't you, I don't want to have to start with you telling me something, but I'm curious to know what your experience of the human fly is.
Okay, so human fly for me, obviously, I was a huge comic book collector when I was a kid, huge comic book lover. I'm still a huge comic book lover, involved with a lot of Comic-Con, so like it's in my blood, literally. But the human fly was a very, very particular one, and sometimes when you're a kid, you remember things from a certain place that when you grow up, you realize you were probably really impressionable and you were looking at somebody who was telling you this with these big wide eyes, believing anything they told you. Mm-hmm. But when the human fly did that jump at the Olympic Stadium, I remember 6 months later, maybe in that time frame, I was at breakfast with my dad, and my dad used to work for Montreal Gazette. He was a district manager for all the carriers. It was one of his 7 jobs. And this guy came and had breakfast with us, and he walked like he had pins and needles in him. He walked like he kind of was a bit, had a bit of something that happened to him, whether he'd been injured, maybe he was an ex-pro athlete, kind of like a guy
You met Rick Rojad?
I don't know.
Okay.
But all I remember is I sat down and had breakfast, and my dad told me, this guy's the human fly. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, this guy's the human fly. I'm like, okay, Dad. And I remember that clear as day. And I remember he was a somewhat big dude, and he walked like Hulk Hogan would walk now, like a wrestler that's aged.
Well, he just had that tremendous wipeout on the motorcycle.
Well, that's it. So is it true? Was it maybe my dad just kind of hyping something up that had happened and that was topical in Montreal at the time, because obviously everyone was talking about that whole thing?
It sounds true. So the Rick Rojad,
and this happened in NDG. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
That's even better. Did
I meet the human fly?
Yes, you did. So
I did.
I'm pretty sure. So, okay. Wow, that's funny. I didn't know that NDG was involved in this story, because I live in NDG too.
Right.
So I do know this about Rick Rajad, who called himself Rick Rojad, was the guy who was in the costume for the stunts.
Right.
That's absolutely for sure.
Okay.
His mother worked at the Gazette.
Okay.
His mother, who's now deceased.
So this connection probably, and I didn't know, and by the way, I didn't know any of this before. I'm telling you all this for the first time.
Yeah, this is a big reveal.
I think this might, again, this is like probably an 8 or 9 year old kid's memory. I think he was fair haired.
Yes.
So
that's
all I remember.
Yes.
But I remember it left an impression, and I went home and read my Human Fly comics, and I told all my friends that I met the Human Fly.
That is crazy. Yeah. So his mother was, I believe, involved in just distribution.
Okay.
She was. I spoke to her later on in life. She was quite embittered, because I think Rick was a troubled guy who was trouble.
Right.
But that's incredible. So let me take. So I'll take you a step back. Yeah.
Okay.
Why the human fly? So I'm a little bit older than you, so I would have been about 12 when the human fly appeared and did his stunts in the 1970s. I'm a screenwriter among all the other things that I do, and many years ago now, it could be 15 years ago or more, I was working on a feature film project, and the producer said to me that if I could come up with a project that was half documentary or half fiction, that there was a budget at Telefilm for about $1 million where he could back me as director of this film. Okay. And I went, I think the human fly story is based in Montreal. I didn't know that at all. I remembered about the human fly. I'll get to that in a second. And I was quite convinced that there was a Montreal connection. So my brother Bob, who is a journalist, and I researched who the rights belong to, and the rights belong to a guy called Giuseppe Ramasieri, who ran Roma Foods with his family. So I called Joe up. I got the number, and I get this hello, because I voice like that. And I said, "Hi, is this Joe Ramasieri?" "Yeah, it is." I said, "Do you own the rights to the human fly?" He goes, "Yeah, I do." So I investigated, and I spoke to Joe, and his brother Dominic was also alive at the time, and I met them, and I found out that these guys who ran the sausage factory had an employee whose sister maybe was married to Rick Rajat.
Okay.
And was very upset because he'd ripped her off of money somehow. And he was a bigamist. He was already married, or they found that out later.
Right.
But there's some issue with Rick, who claimed to have been a Hollywood stuntman. So they wanted to make things straight with Rick, and they met him, and he claimed to be a stuntman. And together, all of them together, created this character, the Human Fly. Because I think the Ramasieris reasoned to themselves that if they tried to do these stunts and he hurt himself, well, nobody knew who he was inside the mask, so they could
just put somebody else in there. Wow.
That's right.
That's brutal.
So when I was around 12 or 13, I can remember being at school at Loyola High School in NEG, and a friend of mine come in saying, "Have you heard of this guy, the Human Fly? He's a real-life superhero." And I was, I loved comics. I was deeply into comics. I bought everything that there was at the time. And I thought, oh my God, there's a real superhero. That's incredible. How crazy is that? And that was, I think, around the time that he'd flown on the back of DC-8 jet planes at California air shows.
Right.
He hadn't yet done the stunt at the Olympic Stadium.
Right.
And what happened at Marvel Comics at the time was that Marvel was at a stage where they were licensing a lot of properties. So if you remember as a fan, they had the Micronauts, Godzilla, Tarzan.
Of course.
Tarzan had been at DC, then he came to Marvel with John Buscema drawing them.
Yep.
Sorry, and I think maybe Roy Thomas writing them. And the Human Fly was part of that licensing trend. They had wanted to license Evel Knievel, didn't work out. And there's stuff, we found so much stuff over the years. Like there's a video of Stan Lee with Roy Thomas looking at some of the pages for the original issues.
Really?
Yeah. And I spoke to Stan Lee on the telephone. I was like, "Hi, Tony." I said, "Do you remember the Human Fly?" "Well, not really. I think I was in Los Angeles already." He was in New York. He'd forgotten. And I said, "It was very successful, the launch of the comic. It sold 400,000 copies." "All right. Really? Wow. Yeah, that is a success." So he was kind of tangentially involved, I think. He'd already left Marvel in New York. So yeah, they published, I think, 26 issues, of which I bought every one at the time, The Spider-Man was in the first one, and the Ghost Rider, and then...
he was ushered in like he was going to be part of the Marvel Universe.
Right.
And he technically kind of still is in one way or another.
Well, so when I eventually acquired the rights.
Right.
Joe died. Before he died, I got the rights. And we discovered that, going through it all, that there's a very unique rights situation with the Human Fly that doesn't exist with any other.
Just tell me about it.
So we own, of that Marvel run, we own half of every page that the Human Fly's on.
Really?
Yeah.
So if they ever do anything with the Human Fly,
we've spoken to them. They can't. Like, we own the character.
So have they ever come and tried to reprint?
There was, again, odd. Like, if you're a fan, so I once, if you do your internet research for the Human Fly, there was a comic about villains maybe 6 years ago. I forget what it was called. And there was a preview, and on the preview there was the Human Fly. And it said, and I think Comic Book Resources had put out an article saying, "Who owns the Human Fly?"
Okay.
So I was like, "Oh, I can sue Marvel." And then by the time the comic came out, they'd replaced the Human Fly on the cover with somebody else.
So they just maybe put it out there, and
somebody became aware that they don't own the character.
Right.
So of the original run of the comics, we own half of every page except for the pages that the Marvel characters are on.
Got it.
So with Spider-Man, Ghost Rider, White Tiger, Daredevil, I think are all in the comics. We don't have any rights to those pages, but all the rest, if they were to reprint the comic, and we've always in discussion.
Well, that's the thing now. Like, when you look at all those comics from the 70s, the big thing now is trades. So everybody wants, they want to read the run in a trade or in an omnibus or something. So and I imagine it would do well because there's so many people that read it back then, but it's never been done.
One would think, yeah. I mean, I think at one point during our long development of, getting the Fly back, we had spoken to Diamond briefly, who wanted to, Dynamite, pardon me, Dynamite.
Okay.
Wanted to redo, to reprint, and they got in touch with legal at Marvel, and, everything is slow. Like in the world of IP, everything is glacially slow. So what had happened was I said, okay, great. I think the story of what happened behind the scenes is really interesting, and I've written many iterations of the screenplay over time. And then, somebody will always come up and say, well, I'd like to redo a comic, or I'd like to. So eventually, IPI in Australia, there's this guy, Chris Sequeira,
Yeah.
who was a writer and editor, was very dogged in wanting to get to do this. And he tried with Dynamite, and he tried with maybe somebody else, and eventually it worked out. So this comic came out this year.
Yeah.
And Chris did a really good job. Like, I'm very happy with number 0. Everybody put their whole hearts into it. The art's great. The stories, I wrote the second story, so I think it's good.
Yeah.
I think the first story is really good. And while we've been developing things on the film side, you know, as you and I discussed before we started, this is my 3rd time at Comic-Con in San Diego this year. You know, I just became aware that people liked the character a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I liked the whole background story, but then I realized, no, people love this guy. They love the design of the fly, that, you know, the red mask with the sort of the plus sign is very iconic and cool. And so I incorporated, you know, the heroic fly into the screenplay in a kind of a meta fourth wall way.
Yeah.
And so where we're at now is that Stephen Campanelli, who's a director who directed Indian Horse and it'll come to me, a bunch of other films. He's known us for years, and he said, I really want to make this movie. So we've attached him as a director, and it's out with various producers looking at it now. He worked with Clint Eastwood for 30 years as his camera operator.
Yeah.
So Stephen is very, I hope to interview him for this podcast. But he's very influenced by Clint Eastwood in that, you know, if you cast a film right and you try to shoot it to be real, your job as a director is a whole lot easier.
Well, yeah, of course. So not only is there a comic book, there's a movie in the works. So
movie and there's a company in London called Astronaut Films UK that have been developing a documentary, feature-length documentary. They have some funding from Sky TV, I'm pretty sure. And earlier this year, we were trying to find Rick.
Right.
Because, you know, a lot of the funding was contingent upon us finding out what happened to him. We did locate him in Ontario.
Okay.
He's still alive, but out of respect for the family, we can't really say where he's at.
Right.
But we actually found him. So there was press earlier in the year. There was the CTV did some press and some newspaper, old-fashioned newspapers.
Right.
in the Waterloo area, did some articles. So yeah, it's been a very active year for The Fly.
So there's a lot to unpack with everything you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with owning the IP.
Yeah.
And let's go back to the original artwork from the original run. Do
Right.
you know, because I mean, obviously when people are going to dig back, obviously they want to know the story and they're going to want to know about Rick.
Yeah.
But a lot of the comic book fans are going to want to know, like a lot of comic book fans want to know, where are those original pages from those Marvel books? Does anybody know? Are they are they owned by personal collectors, or were they destroyed in what Marvel used to do, which was destroy
I think
art?
Marvel must have the pages somewhere.
Okay. Have you seen if anybody owns any, like, because sometimes you'll look and there's individual collectors, you know, that have them in personal collections.
Well, I mean, just when I acquired the rights, I also acquired the whole print run. So I think normally what happens now, if they put out an archive edition, is that they'll just scan the pages.
No, of course, but I'm just curious what happened to the original artwork.
The original art?
I wonder if we did research or
you
someone
might know,
did research.
you might know better than me as a comics fan. Like Marvel was just
They would, a lot of the times they would just shred it.
Right.
Which is, and that's why, you know, guys like Bob Layton, guys like Neil Adams, the ones.
Bob Layton. I have a Bob Layton Human Fly on my shirt here and some of our original merchandise. Yeah.
But these are the guys that would fight for the rights for the comic books, you know, and for the artists, because nowadays with the popularity of, I mean, look, comics have gone from stuff that you and I used to read that people laughed at to the biggest things in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So everybody goes back now and says, well, I want the original appearance of these people, the original pages, like where they were first drawn.
Right.
Forget about the issue,
Yeah.
the actual source art. It's become fine art. So and that's the crazy part, is that a lot of that stuff just got destroyed because they were like, oh, let's move on to the next book.
Yeah, and well, the Human Fly, you know, in the Marvel comics, they were written by Bill Mantlo.
Yeah.
So, and Bill Mantlo has a tragic story that he had a motorcycle accident and ended up in a vegetative state for many years. So, which is too bad, sad. Right. It's the Human Fly curse.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Right.
Yeah, and so he did a lot of fun stuff in the comics writing wise.
Yeah.
The art was by Frank. I hate his art so much too. And it's so controversial because he drew the Invaders. You might remember him. It's not Frank Springer. Anyway, we can look it up. But he had a really crazy style where like people were, really disjointed. And
Yeah.
so as a kid, I didn't like the art. But now there's a lot of people who love
Sure.
his crazy style. And I know he drew the Shadow too for DC. And
Yeah, okay, I know who you're talking about now. Yes,
Yeah,
yes, it is a little bit. It's. I mean, nowadays it's a little bit more. But there's a lot of artists that kind of went off the beaten track. Even Steranko, like sometimes he would do stuff and like, what are you doing?
I just love the lore of the industry at that time, from the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Oh,
Of
yeah.
these guys who lived in New Jersey probably and drew comics. And there was, I don't think people realize now, but if you look back to the 30s and 40s, I've not read this anywhere, but I'm quite certain that the superhero look came from wrestling, like with the trunks, right?
A lot of it did, and a lot of the stories were mirrored from a lot of immigrants' experiences coming over from
Right.
Europe and wanting to have the power back. Going through either wars or whatever discrimination, and that's why Marvel, especially, Stan, all of his stories were about people. They were basically and it's well documented now, but a lot of that stuff was based on what these people felt when they were coming over. When they were coming on Ellis Island and getting into New York and being in the Marvel bullpen and being in a place where they could put what they were frustrated about into a character and actually have some power. So that's what a lot of people don't realize. And I mean, and what's great about this is that it just opened the doors for people to go in and just experience all this stuff through their eyes and through their characters. So, but what I always liked about the Human Fly was that he was real. The whole idea that he was real, and the whole idea that he had a Montreal connection.
Well, you nailed the real part.
Yeah.
Because one of the things we're doing now is with the comic, is that, I've had to really develop I and our team had to develop the mythology around him. Who is the Human Fly?
Yeah.
And there are other writers who are going to be writing the second series of 4, so there'll be 12 planned.
Okay.
But I said the biggest thing is he is real.
Yeah.
He is real. So my point of view is that, there's the whole Wold Newton world thing developed by Philip Jose Farmer, which is that there is a real life equivalent of many characters of fiction. So
Yeah.
there's a real Tarzan, there's a real Doc Savage, there was a real Dracula, there was a real this. And I went, that's great. The Human Fly is like that too. He's part of that lineage.
Yeah.
So we're going to be revealing that in stories to come.
Okay.
That in fact he, because the stories are set now, the new stories. So how can he be so long-lived? Well, he has a long history.
Yeah.
That could be decades or centuries long, and that Rick Rojat was like a fictional character that he created for one reason or another
Right.
at the time, but is one of many possible identities that the guy behind the mask had.
Right, and the idea that someone picks up the mantle and becomes the Human Fly when the Human Fly is incapacitated to do it. Like someone is the Human Fly always. I love that idea.
Yeah, it's like the Phantom. It's
Well,
funny
yeah.
that the guys from Australia are involved in this because, the Phantom is huge in
Yeah,
Australia.
big time.
And you have that long lineage of characters. So there's so much we can do with them now that we've thought it out more. So what started with me as a writer was an interest in the real life story, which we're still going to tell in the future. But now, in the meta universe of the fictional character, there's so much we can do.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And again, he is a showman. As you see in that comic, he's still performing stunts. He still talks like a showman.
Yeah.
But he meets Justin Trudeau at the Olympic Stadium. So, I want every story to be grounded in something real.
In some kind of reality.
Yeah.
And then again, going back to Marvel, and why Marvel was so successful is that they were in real cities. DC.
Yeah.
It was Metropolis. It was Gotham City. Marvel was in New York City. It was in, if they were in Canada, they were in a part of Canada that you knew. Like, it was real.
Yeah.
And I think you need to be grounded in some kind of reality. So when I was looking at some of the splash pages and some of the stuff that was in the initial press release, because I haven't read the book yet, and I'm excited to read it. And I didn't want to read it and then talk to you. I wanted to kind of...
Yeah, well, I won't spoil it.
But when I saw that he's at the Olympic Stadium and Trudeau's there, and I was like, okay, this is good because they're keeping... You need that. I think that's what lures people, and that's what keeps people kind of grounded and cemented in some kind of reality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's for a Montreal person like me.
Yeah.
To see that the story set at the Olympic Stadium. It's
amazing.
His crew is all here.
Yeah.
I'm going, wow, this is like, it's so, I have to say, like having developed this, I have a partner in LA called Alan Brewer. I'm going to name check Alan because it hasn't been me alone all the whole time. But part of the fun of doing this has been seeing this iteration come to life.
Yeah.
And seeing how people, the people who are creating it love it. There's people like you who know the character, who love the character. And there's a real sense of fun now and joy in this coming back. And, people should pick it up and read it. I will point out that number 1 is coming out soon, that we have a variant cover by Bill Sienkiewicz, who's a...
Yeah, you were mentioning that before we came on here. Like, how did Bill get involved? Because Bill is one of the tops, one of the best. To get him involved with something,
you'd have to ask Chris in Australia. They got him
because I mean, and I know just the way he creates his art, it's not quick, because he paints and he does all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So for him to get involved with the project, I know from firsthand that he won't get involved with stuff unless he really wants to, and he's at that place where he can pick and choose. So for him to do something like that means he wanted to.
I love the cover, and I love his work. I think it's so interesting. It's so disruptive.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, we're very lucky. So hopefully that's going to get some attention. And there's also, you'll see when you read the comic, it's not a throwback, but it's an homage to, the comic books that I read as a kid. It's very, upbeat and positive and fun. And there's variant covers that I've seen for issues 1 and 2, where we're doing other homages to, to Jim Steranko, to Steve Ditko, to the Gold Key Comics, to Carmen Infantino. So if you're a fan and you see the covers, you're going to go, oh, this is so fun. Like, we're part of that tradition. And again, I'm not the kind of comics fan who's all in. Like, I'm not I have to bow to people who are big fans. Like, I think in my personality, I tend to be always a little bit guarded in anything.
Sure, of course.
So I haven't gone all in, but I appreciate that people have. And I think for those fans, they'll see that this is a real love letter and possibly a source of joy and fun. And again, we'll be at New York Comic Con in the fall. Hopefully, it'll be in Winnipeg and some other places. And for me, as on this journey, I'm going, okay, like this is a cool world to be in because there's so much fan love. And the people are so invested in the characters. And yes, it's become huge business, absolutely. But without the support of fans who really invest their imaginations in these worlds, none of it would have happened. So it's a privileged place to be for a creative person.
One of the things that's really important when you have an IP like this is, all the different places that you can bring it. And you're mentioning, documentary, you're mentioning print, you're mentioning feature film, toys. Have you looked at that world at all? Action figures, because that's going to come up.
Well, the guy who used to cut my hair when I had hair, Joseph.
Yeah, more than me.
Yeah, he makes his own toys. He's into comics and toys.
Yeah.
And it's a world I need to know more about. But absolutely, like there have been fans have made human fly toys. So if you look it up, they've done with fully articulated.
Yeah, no. Well, the thing is now with 3D printing, and with people that people make their own custom action figures all the time. It's a huge market.
Yeah.
So someone wanted to make an action figure review, they could do it. It's crazy what it's gotten to. But it would be great to see a line of toys, and especially it would be great to see them on a bike.
Oh yeah. Well, so we are actively looking into that.
Okay.
I would love it. We're, again, you can see you're wearing the T-shirt. We're trying to merchandise.
Yeah.
Point out that T-shirts are available at digitin.com.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about that. So the idea of expanding the merch line and having a merch line, was that something that was that a natural addition to this, or was there how did you?
I have a advertising agency called Cornelius, and we for some of our clients had to explore doing drop shipping sites.
Yep.
So, and way before that, my God, everything goes so back. That design on your shirt of the fly, I worked with a company called Circo de Bacusa a lot on big events, and at one point I said, "Hey guys, do you want to just do some cool designs?" So they came up with that really iconic design. I think it was, and I talked to different art directors now. So I'm going to name them: Julie Brassard, Julien Modesty. You know, one of them and one of their crew designed it, and I think the design is so great.
Yeah.
So we started. So yeah, a couple of years ago, I thought, well, you know, well, let's build a Shopify site and come up with designs. So we did that, and now with Fred and with Speaker and with Dig It In, we thought, oh, let's podcast. Let's get this information out there. Let's get these shirts out there because it looks really cool. And you know, ultimately, you want this. Any of these characters now, you have a child who's 23, you mentioned. I have a daughter who's in her 30s, and I have a son who's 23. And, you know, I've noticed as someone who used to read comics for comics,
Yeah.
and of course, you know, we're like the, you know, awkward dad, you know, read this comic, read this comic, read this comic. Their access to these characters in these worlds is now from everywhere.
Yeah.
It's through merch, it's online. So you kind of have to create a world that has perhaps many iterations.
Oh yeah, and that's it. I mean, with you know, and of course that goes into video games. But what's great is that it's starting with a comic book. It's expanded. There's merch, but I'm really excited to see where you guys take this because being a fan and as you just confirmed, I probably met the human fly when I was a kid.
I'm astounded, by the way. I can't wait for this to get out there.
Yeah, because I really this has been a hero that's been with me for a long, long time. Again, I think it was like a 26, you mentioned 26-page run, or 26-issue run.
Something like that,
I know it was a fairly short run, but
Yeah.
it's always been something that I've wanted to have. And I've always been excited to see where this character...
So attention, Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
You know, there are people who would like to read a...
Oh, yeah, 100%. So definitely tell people where they can get more information on this and tell people...
so we're on Facebook at Human Fly International. There's a Human Fly International Instagram page. Digitin.com sells the merch. We don't have a Human Fly website at this time, but we will get one up soon.
Okay.
You can find out more about the comic at IPI Comics, who have their own website. I believe it's ipicomics.com. And if you are a fan who still goes to stores, ask the owner to stock the comic.
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
comics are sold by Luna and Diamond. They put out the catalogs, and IPI is being careful not to overdo the print run. So they're printing as many comics as are ordered.
Right. So when they're gone, they're gone.
They will be reprinted.
Right.
and
But you
graphic novel format.
you want number one. Like you want the first print. Trust me. As a collector, you want the first print.
Well, number one is being solicited now.
Right. No, but I mean you want the first you want the first printing. That's what I'm saying. Of anything. You want this is going to be the first print. So if this gets reprinted, they'll have to put second printing in it, and these are the ones you're going to want.
I hope that is eventually worth a lot of money. But again, it's just I'm you know, for collectors, I think it's super exciting.
Yeah,
and
of
for
course.
everybody else, yeah. It's great.
And lastly, just as a comic book fan and as someone who read comic books as a kid, are you excited that you can actually hold this in your hand and say
you know what? I'm getting a chill actually when I think about it, because in my professional life, I work on gigantic $10 million projects in Stadia and with big stars. So comics are a humble place.
Yeah.
And as I think I mentioned before, I wrote my story while I was on an event in Saudi Arabia. I started doing it and planning it. So, and I used to draw comics as a kid. I used to write and draw my own comics.
Sure.
So I know how to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm 60, so I have a grandchild, but I was so thrilled to get the comic made.
Yeah.
And it was printed here. It was printed at
all comics. They always have been.
Yeah. So I went to pick it up.
Yeah.
At the printer. So I opened the box and looked in and went, wow, this is really special. And again, this is just me personally. I'm being honest about myself. I tend to maybe to avoid disappointment. I tend to keep things at professional arm's length all the time, and not wear my heart on my sleeve too much. But yeah, it does mean a lot for sure.
Did you do the typical thing that a collector would do? Did you break open the box and then look for the one that had no dings on the spine, or you weren't that?
You know what? By the way, and you were in a band, and so when it comes to that kind of thing, I'm the worst. Like if it's a comic or a guitar,
Yeah.
I treat it like a piece of shit. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't, but I'm just not that kind of
Well,
guy.
listen, regardless, it's exciting. There's variant covers that you can get. If you guys have not checked this out yet, definitely check it out. I can't wait to crack this open and read it.
All yours.
And man, thanks for taking the time to chat about this.
Thank you.
Because
That's really great.
it's fun. It's rooted in reality. There's a Montreal connection, and just the fact that this is back in the universe and back in like the real world again. I can't wait to see where this goes.
Thanks so much.